All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining us this Thursday, midday, lunchtime. Thanks for spending it with us. We appreciate you. This session is Practicing Cultural Humility, which is the second chapter of the Becoming a Better Mentor resource. We'll jump into more about what that resource is. I'm Renee Angela Monk. Happy to be your facilitator today from Mentor Maryland, DC. If you're not familiar with what Mentor Maryland DC is, we are a nonpartisan organization, part of the National Mentoring Partnership. We are your local community-based experts here in covering Maryland and DC. There are about 26 affiliates representing the National Mentoring Partnership. We aim to be your local mentoring experts. And I like to say that our main purpose is to ensure that you, the people on the front lines of the mentoring movement, have everything you need to do the work. And I really mean that in every possible way. So whether that's knowledge, whether that's resources in every possible way, the human resources, the fiscal resources, the kids to do the work. We want to make sure that you have what you need to do the work and to do it well. So we aim to be sure that you have what you need and that we are always here as a support. And throughout this, any questions I can't answer for you today, I'll be honest about that, and I'll always be a resource during this training and after this training and in the future for you to reach out to and to talk things out and to gain further knowledge from. So please know that we're here for you. I'm here for you. And if this is your first contact with me, I hope that it's not the last, and we'll be in touch. So that's a little bit about us. And again, if this is your first contact with us, the aim is for it not to be the last. So we're happy to be here. And yeah, there's a lot of different ways you can interact with us. So some of the things that we do. So one, our connection with the National Mentoring Partnership. If you've not gone to their website, it is ripe with materials of which that we aim to give to you through opportunities like this. But that's always a website with tons of resources for you. If you've been to the National Mentoring Summit in January, that is something that they host and put on in DC. We're always there. So please come with us this January and stay in touch with us about getting down there and being a part of that amazing opportunity. Someone, Kessia brought up earlier in the chat, our technical assistants. So we have a cadre of amazing expert consultants who offer this no-cost opportunity, which is a one-on-one opportunity between our consultants and your program to do that even deeper work about what does your program need. And they're able to meet with your program for a certain amount of hours about exactly what your program needs. So whether that's, procedural work or a recruitment plan, truly whatever is specific to your program, they can spend time with your program working that out. So Sadiq dropped the link in the chat, but I'll get these slides too. These are all clickable links, and that is an option for you throughout the year. So that's something you can always access. The Mentoring Connector, which is the only national database for prospective mentors to reach and to learn about places that they can mentor. So if you're not already listed in the Mentoring Connector, you can click there and register your program. So we operate and maintain the local database for Maryland and DC. So you definitely want to make sure that you are in there. And again, prospective mentors can look and find your program, and also young people and families looking to put their children in programs, they can find your program there as well. Trainings like this one is something that we want to do for you. Roundtables, Dayan has really gotten them going in DC, Montgomery County, and Prince George's County. We want to get them going in the other regions of Maryland as well. So bring you all together to share your experiences with each other. We know that you all have your own expertise to share with each other. So we want to make sure that you guys are connected with each other to share your experiences and your knowledge with each other. Sharing mentoring best practices. So the National Mentoring Partnership does tons of research around the elements of best practices and these kind of more niche groups and best practices for certain groups, etc. So we aim to get that information to you. The National Quality Mentoring System, which is something that we do with, or that a program can do with our consultants through that no-cost technical assistance. This is kind of a badge of honor for programs that we encourage programs to do every 3 years. That kind of helps your program see where you're at as far as best practices and gives programs improvement plans even though we know you're doing great, so you guys can be even better and do the best possible work. Connection to funding opportunities, so helping you all, again, get those fiscal resources that you need, and of course, access to mentoring.org, like I said, the many plethora of resources that are there, and ensuring that you know about them, including the resource we're talking about today, and that you are utilizing them for everything that you need. So something that we don't always talk about, but I want to talk about more with you all, is our strategic plan and our strategic priorities. So last year we released our strategic plan over the summer, and now it's been a year. And do we remember what our priorities are? And I share because our priorities are aligned with what your priorities are. And we cannot reach our priorities without you, because again, you are the ones doing the work. So our priorities are to help you all, excuse me, are to benefit you all, the mentoring movement, the mentoring field. So I want to be talking about these more because again, they include you and are here to benefit you. And so again, that we can be in conversation about how we're doing these and how we can do these together, because again, they include you. And this is something that we want to be collaborating on across Maryland and across DC. So our first priority is systems level advocacy. So acknowledging who in power is on our side, who's going to champion mentoring and advocate for mentoring. So another thing we do in January when we're in DC with the National Mentoring Summit is, speak to the people in power who are there in DC about mentoring, and who's going to create policies to, to fund mentoring, to speak on mentoring, and to uplift mentoring, in the places of power and where it matters. Expand mentoring programs, where are the kids? They're at school. So mentoring programs in school, expand faith-based mentoring, where we know there's a lot of natural, what we call like natural mentoring happening. Increasing Black and Brown grassroots programs, where again, where we know mentoring is happening. So ensuring that those grassroots programs have funding and those best practices and the like. So ensuring that there are enough mentoring programs to catch those kids, because we know that not every kid is in a program. So we want to ensure that kids have mentors. Absolutely. And our last part is shifting the narrative. So ensuring that the way we speak about youth, the way we speak about mentoring, is honoring youth for the wonderful and amazing people that they are, and that youth are a part of that narrative as well. And youth are speaking about their experiences in their own voice, in a way that is honoring how wonderful they are, and that is strengths-based, and that is not this kind of negative view and lens that often mentoring has been historically spoken about, if we know about the history of mentoring. So this is kind of that narrative shift that we want to move towards, and that I know a lot of you have been doing naturally. So we want to continue to do that, and that's a big priority for us. So if you're not familiar with our strategic plan, it's on our website. This is a link. Like I said, we'll be sending these out. So want to remind about that, and happy to share those with you. So I'm going to ask my colleague on the call to launch a poll just to get a quick idea of who is here today. And that will help to inform me about how I'm going to let you all know about this resource we are going to talk about. So my colleague is launching a Zoom poll. And just going to let me know if he's having trouble. It's going. Oh, I can't see it. Does everyone see it? It seems to not. Okay, so it's asking, who is here today? Who are you? What is your role? I'm doing it at the beginning of training just to get an idea of, again, who is here. And I also asked this question not to say that a certain type of person should be here. I think a lot of the information we talk about is useful for all levels of role. And that whoever you are, you can have influence over the spaces that you are in. But especially for this resource specifically, it can have a different role depending on whose hand it's in. So it's specific for this training. The resource is magical and whoever's hand it may be, but it can be used in different ways depending on whose hand it's in. So for my colleague, let me know when it gets to a certain percentage filled out, we can end the poll and share the results. But let me know who you are, what your role is.
We are sharing. We have 43% program leader executive. We have 29% program staff. We have 21% mentor, and no young people with us today, shame. And 7% match. My mentor mentees on the call with me today. So again, 43% program leader, 29% staff, 21% mentor, no young people, and 7% match.
Great.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Great and wonderful spread. So I'm going to jump directly into a little brief video about what this Becoming a Better Mentor resource is, and then we'll transition into this Practicing Cultural Humility, which is one part of this larger Becoming a Better Mentor resource. So I'm going to play a short video. And again, if there's any sound issues, please let me know.
Becoming a Better Mentor, Strategies to Be There for Young People was developed with you, the mentor, in mind. The information will help you fill your mentoring toolbox with helpful skills to be an even better mentor than you are. It offers guidance on topics such as effective online communication, cultivating youth voice, and practicing cultural humility, to name just a few. The introduction gives a brief overview of youth development and describes why having a mentoring mindset is important. Your work as a mentor is grounded in love and caring. It shows that you have a purpose beyond your own life and a desire to make the world a better place. We encourage you to embrace that idea and make it part of your identity. You are a mentor. That means a lot, especially at this moment in time. So, explore becoming a better mentor, and good luck on your mentoring journey. See the full resource at mentoring.org/bettermentor for more tips on how you can be a better mentor.
Awesome. So as you might expect by the language in this video, this was a resource created for mentors. So, which is actually new for the National Mentoring Partnership, which typically makes resources for mentoring programs. So here at Mentor Maryland DC, we typically interact with programs who are interacting with mentors. And that is for the National Mentoring Partnership as well. We make resources for programs. We're an intermediary between programs and mentors. And I'm going to drop the link to the website for Becoming a Better Mentor. So this is the first real resource that's been created for mentors. So that's kind of a new thing for them. And this was the framework that they created for this larger resource, which is multiple chapters. And again, Practicing Cultural Humility is one chapter of that. So this, again, when we talk about who's here today, can be a resource for programs to introduce to mentors. And while a lot of the language I'm going to use today is as if I'm talking to only mentors, again, we can adapt this as well to anybody who's in a relationship with a young person, which anybody who works at a program, a program leader, a program staff member, we're all in a relationship with young people and we have that mentoring dynamic. But as far as this kind of larger project, this book, Becoming a Better Mentor, everything is about these core practices of what it means to be a mentor. The idea and these principles that there's no one element that's more important than the other. I realize now that in my emails, I was like, we think this is the most important one. And it's not that it's the most important one, it's kind of pressing, right? And that, again, all of these topics, just 12 chapters in total, are very, very important and really add up to becoming a better mentor, and that there really is no kind of end point in mind. And excuse me, it's really about this growth element, and that these skills can really add up for mentor growth. A lot of these things too are about this kind of like mentoring 101, this mentoring mindset, and are about this kind of building this authenticity and this honesty, being committed, being willing to grow and learn, and reducing harm. So our hope is, and what we're kind of where we are kind of at our affiliates and the National Mentoring Partnership, is that now we have this resource, and what do we want to do with it? And now that it's in the affiliate hands, we're there. And what we've decided to do at Mentor Maryland DC is that we want to bring the most pressing chapters, of which we thought cultural humility was, to you. And we want to kind of break it down chapter by chapter and bring what we thought we felt would be most pressing, what was most you all might be most interested in. We thought cultural humility will be up first, and we wanted to bring that to you. So again, these blue circles here are the different chapters in the book. You can download the whole book at the link in the chat. The whole book, I think it's under 100 pages. There's a little video for each chapter that's under 2 minutes. We won't watch the cultural humility video, but it's a great like 2-minute like super summation of the whole chapter if you really wanted to quickly share some of the takeaways with people. But we're kind of in this point now where, again, how do we share this amazing information out? It really is a wonderful resource. And for my programs who are on the call, we can be in conversation as us, the affiliate, and you programs about how do we adapt this information for mentors and get what we need out. Because I don't expect that in one go, we can get all this information out very easily. It's an in-depth resource. But for what's most important and most pressing in that kind of mentor 101, what do mentors need to know before they interact with kids and what do they need to know ongoing? Let's collaborate and let's figure out how we can get this information out to mentors. And for my mentors on the call, you know, some of these things you're going to see at different points in your relationship with a young person about what is pressing and what you need to know. And then again, this is something that you can read on your own and adapt as needed, or that you can go to your program and, ask them for assistance and, be in conversation and bounce ideas off of. But today we're going to jump into what is in the Becoming a Better Mentor resource, chapter 2, Practicing Cultural Humility. And that's where we're at. Everybody, you with me? We're ready to get started. We're getting specific now. All right. Here we go. Okay. Oh man, my transition didn't work. Okay. Practicing cultural humility. Oh, my notes didn't show up. Okay, no problem. All right. So cultural humility, what is it? So cultural humility is this ongoing, lifelong process of self-reflection and learning about how social identity and experiences are shaped by systems of oppression, power, and privilege. So what is social identities? So we have to get there. So what is that? So social identities are a person's sense of who they are, right? Like, who is this? And a lot of this is based on group membership, right? Because that's kind of how we relate and how we define ourselves when we're out here and living our lives. So these can be based on our physical characteristics, our social characteristics, our mental characteristics, so race, gender, class, ability, sexuality, religion, and these can be self-proclaimed or ascribed to us by others. So before we really even start anything, we need to figure out who we are, right? We need to spend time doing that reflection about who we are and what our social identities are. And we also want to consider too that our social identities, they're often not static and they can be dynamic. And you may think that your social identities, you maybe have defined these things for yourself before and you've figured this out and you've done this work before. But that's exactly where we're going to kind of get to the point today, is that this work is not done and figuring these things out is ongoing, and that's what cultural humility is. So we're going to jump right into an activity, into reflecting on social identity. So first, what I'm going to do is we're going to take 5 minutes to do this social identity wheel, and we'll do that here in the main room. So if you have a piece of paper, however you like to do work, if you want to write it down, if you want to, open a tab and type, however you like to do it. I'm going to give you time. Yeah, we'll take 4 minutes to complete your social identity wheel. This is an example. You don't have to do this exact wheel if some of these in the circle are not important, like that you don't necessarily relate to, but we want to complete at least a few of these in this social identity wheel. So different aspects of your social identity that are specific to you, right? So race and ethnicity, for example, spirituality, your family, gender identity, sexual orientation, community. That could be where you live, maybe where you're from, beliefs and values, maybe your hobbies and interests. Again, you can create your own wheel and your own social identity aspects, but this is a pretty good example. 8, again, might be too many to figure out, but I'll give you 4 minutes. We'll take that until 12, a little before 12 to do that. And then we're going to get into breakout rooms. I'll keep this projected into the rooms. We'll take 7 minutes in the rooms. Take some time to discuss about how it felt to really take time to do that reflection about filling out your wheel, right? Taking time to think about yourself and how you identify in these different areas, and then take some time to think about what's a story that you could share with a young person, whether that's your mentee, whether that's a young person that you interact with on a daily basis, or not a daily basis, on a regular basis, whether that might be a young person in your program, or for me, maybe like my nephew or somebody I interact with regularly. What's a story that you could share about one of your social identities that would be meaningful to them based on your relationship with them? So I'm going to give you until 12 p.m. now. I'll turn on some music. You can turn your video off if you'd like. Work on completing your wheel, whatever that looks like in the situation that you're in. And then I will start up the breakout rooms, and we will, and I'll leave this up. I'll project this into the breakout room so you can do the second, third bullet in the breakout rooms. If you have any questions, drop them in the chat. I'm going to turn on some music now so we can, again, complete your identity wheel, and then we'll get into breakout rooms. All right, y'all, welcome back. All right, if a group or two, I'm not pressed on who, if anybody wants to share something interesting that came up. Yeah, what came up? Something new. I know people have done similar activities to this. Again, I'm getting to why it's useful to do this activity more than once and why it's good to revisit. But yeah, anything interesting come up doing this activity in your groups and talking it out?
I can share. So it was interesting in our group because a couple of us had done it before and a couple of us had not. And I still think in a way we felt similarly. I think to an extent it is kind of confusing and uncomfortable because you're putting yourself into these groups. But I'm one of the people who have done it before, and I've done it a lot, and I really like this. And I think it's interesting for me doing it because I've done it for years. And so seeing how even my own wheel changes over time. And we also talked about how it could be reassuring for youth to know that everybody has these wheels and that you don't necessarily have to fit into like the stereotypes with all of those groups on your wheel. But yeah, I don't know if anybody wants to add anything. That's generally what we talked about.
Great point. Right. So the resistance to want to be put into to have a wheel and to have to divide it up, right? And that the thought of doing that puts you at risk to stereotyping. And how do we stop that? And the idea is that this practice will actually help us to avoid stereotyping. Great point. Wonderful. Anybody else? Maybe somebody who has not done it before, that first experience of doing it for the first time?
This was my first time doing it, and I was in the same group as Hannah, but I was telling them that this was a little uncomfortable for me, mainly like the sexual orientation part, because I'm not normally very open about my sexual orientation. I'm kind of private about certain things, and like my own, like some of my close family doesn't even fully know all of that. So I guess filling some of it out was a little awkward and uncomfortable for me. And then I guess I was wondering, like, if I shared this, like how comfortable would I even be sharing this? I don't know. It felt very personal, but a little uncomfortable, but yeah.
Sure. Right, even filling it out to yourself, right, versus whether going to share it out, which I hope it was clear that you didn't have to share out necessarily what you wrote, which of course you didn't have to, but right, even writing things down and that experience, that's the point is, right, to have that experience, even to write it down and keep it to yourself. That's part of it. So great, wonderful. Thank you all for sharing and for doing it, because right, even just doing it, even if we didn't talk about it, the practice of doing it, I appreciate you all doing that and taking that time. Wonderful. So what does it mean for mentors to be practicing it? So the idea is that mentors who continuously do this and reflect on their social identities will also make efforts to learn about their mentees' social identities and their experiences and their backgrounds. And the idea is that this is something that we continuously do. Social identities can change over time, and the world that we live in will change over time. So as the world is changing, the context of our social identities that we live in will then change. And that's why we kind of need that ongoing reflection, because it will change what our social identities mean. It'll also help us reflect on, the inequities between us and our mentee, and help let us remember that the social inequities of the dynamic of what the social inequities of our mentee and that dynamic might be, and we want to also remember that our mentees are still growing, right? They may still be finding what their identities are. And we want to consider that their identities are not finite, right? Let's say they did this activity, and I have coached mentors on how to do this activity with their mentees. We want to consider that their identities are not finite, and we should be open to their identities changing. And we want to be open to our own identities changing as well. So that idea that, Hannah was talking about how her wheel has changed over time and the many times that she's done that, and that is okay. And again, that the world is changing and that there's more options, to fill out in the wheel. If I'd done this activity 25 years ago, there weren't as many words and options to fill into the wheel. And I feel more comfortable now filling out my wheel than I did 25 years ago, for sure. And that is a good thing. And that's progress. So we want to be wise. We have the practice of, when it means for mentors to practice this, we get the option to, when we do that, we are practicing that comfortability with change, with elasticity, with that dynamic, that things can change, that we can grow, and that plasticity, I mean to say, that stretch of that we can change, that our mentors can change, that they can grow, and then they can be and become who they are and who they're meant to be. Because our mentors are young, they're going to grow for us. And even if we work with older teens, I'm sure, well, I don't know how old everybody is on this call. I just turned 35. My birthday was a few days ago. So if I think about who I was when I was like 17, which for those of us who have worked with young people, like 17 is like on the older end of a young person, we're all quite different. I'm a quite different person than I was when I was 17. And I would hope that any, adult who was working with me at that time, assumed that I was going to become a quite different person, you know what I mean? And that would give me space to be and become a different person. So again, that requires, though, of that adult to do that reflecting and that internal reflecting. And it starts with us first, because when we do that within, it helps reduce that bias for when we do that, again, that kind of, but becomes that projecting out. Does that make sense? Cool. Awesome. But then, why? Why do it? We talked about it a little bit, but what does the research say about doing it? So the fact of the matter is, the research says that mentors who do this, it shows the better development of mentoring relationship. And then for, especially for BIPOC youth, and it shows that the better fostering of youth ethnic and racial identity. So specifically for BIPOC youth, it is really important for them to have a strong fostering of their ethnic and racial identity. The research says that that process of them fostering their ethnic and racial identity leads to better outcomes. And we'll talk a little bit later about avoiding colorblindness, but it's just important for them to have their own cultural experience. And I mean, essentially for them, when you look at that circle, for them to fill out that part of their circle, right? To get in touch with their racial and ethnic identity and to have that experience of fledging out who they are, who am I, and to fill out that part of their social identity wheel. So we want to give that experience to youth. And again, when we do it ourselves, it gives our mentees that opportunity for them to do it for themselves. So for our mentees, it starts with us, and then we give space for our mentees to do it for themselves. Cultural humility can also help mentors overcome barriers in the relationship, help reduce relationship barriers, especially when mentors are mentoring youth of color or youth from a different racial background. The fact of the matter is that we know that a lot in the mentoring space at large, that we have a lot of cross-racial matches. And the fact of the matter is as well is that some youth of color will have cultural mistrust towards people outside of their race, particularly to white adults and especially at first, mentoring can be seen as, white adults being in a position of authority. There can be a mistrust and a general suspicion and distrust towards white people because of historic discrimination, experienced by people of color in the United States, and because youth of color, directly experience racial discrimination from adults in their lives, particularly adults in positions of authority. And having some mistrust is, of course, not necessarily a bad thing, because it can help young people of color, get themselves prepared for bias treatment from adults. And but when it comes to the mentoring space, it can also create a barrier that white mentors need to prepare themselves to overcome. So when mentors are not attuned to the cultural differences between themselves and their mentees, their mentoring relationships can end early. So when on the programmatic side, for those of us who are supervising mentors, we need to be attuned to that and help mentors prepare for that. And for mentors who may be in that situation, we need to get ourselves prepared for that. So cultural humility can help mentors overcome mistrust in their relationship with youth of color in a way that strengthens their relationships and help them last longer. So again, if we're not attuned to those things, if we're ignoring those things, if we're pretending that those things don't exist, then relationships are going to end early, and we're all just pretending it's not happening, and that's not helping anyone. So speaking of what cultural humility is not. So cultural humility is not cultural competency. Notice that I've not said cultural competency once in this training yet, and that's because cultural humility is not that. It's kind of a step beyond that. So cultural competence assumes mastery, right? Cultural competence is kind of like puts a period. It suggests that there's an end point in learning. And this attitude can lead mentors to be overconfident in their relationships. So we keep saying that cultural humility, it's this ongoing learning. It doesn't end, which is why, even though I know people have done that identity wheel activity, I asked you to do it again. And I'm suggesting it's worthwhile to do it again. There's no mastery over a culture. Nothing should humble us more than young people. Young people should always give space for young people to humble us. There's no mastery over another culture. It assumes that the culture is of one type, right? Which leads us to that stereotyping that Hannah was talking about earlier. And we want to avoid stereotyping, of course. When we stop our learning about a culture or even multiple cultures in general, then again, we give no space for cultures to change, for the world to change, for history to change, for when it's tomorrow, today becomes history. So again, there's constant learning for us to do, and cultural humility, when it is in practice, that means there's continued learning to do, and we'll talk about learning in just a few slides. So we're not talking about cultural humility. Not talking about cultural competence. We're talking about cultural humility and ongoing practice and being truly engaged in learning about our own culture and about the culture of our mentees and cultures that are different than us. So, and it's not a mastery, it is a learning process, and being engaged in a learning process that does not end. So sorry about that. This is ongoing work that they're all gonna do forever. So there's that. Cultural humility is not color blindness. So we know that, some Americans grow up believing that seeing race is a form of prejudice and discrimination, and that even mentioning a person's race is racist in of itself. So, color blindness, or I don't see color, or creates a discomfort on the mention of race and around individuals who are racially different from us. So no. So, research on young people of color who reported that when their teachers or again adults in positions of power to them did not step in to acknowledge when racism had taken place, they felt obviously that their instructors did not care about them, but that they actually supported the perpetrators of racism. So not that their instructors were indifferent towards racism, but actually that they were in support of it. Not their instructors weren't saying like, I support the KKK or I support this racist incident. Their instructors were saying nothing, but they didn't see it as that they were being neutral. What the instructors maybe thought that they were doing by saying nothing, but the young people took it as being in support of racism. So there is no color. Cultural humility is not color blindness. We're talking about acknowledging it because it is meaningful and it is powerful, and the young people are taking cues from it. When we're ignoring it, it is about being on the right and the wrong side, right? When we're ignoring it, young people are taking it as being on the side of harm, and it's harmful to ignore it. The fact of the matter is, of course, some mentors may be uncomfortable bringing up racist events, events of racism and harm, and these things are coming up more and more often, which is why we need to, for those of us who supervise and train mentors, we need to help them get prepared. And for mentors on the call, if you're in a program, ask for help. If you're not, we're here to help you get prepared. They may feel uncomfortable to talk about these events, and we understand, or they're afraid to talk about them. They don't know how to talk about their mentees. Understandable. But when acknowledging race and acknowledging racism is the first step to connecting with your young person of color, if you're connected with a young person of color. So cultural humility is not color blindness. We're not doing it. Color blindness causes more harm, creates more harm, is a greater barrier in your relationship than acknowledging it. So we're not doing it. So does that make sense? Are we understanding the difference between cultural humility and cultural competency and the like, everybody? Thank you for the birthday wishes in the chat, by the way. Thanks, John. Cool. All right, so some more actionable steps about how we're practicing, or how mentors, you all, are actually practicing excuse me, cultural humility. So again, more self-reflection. And I feel that at this point, it might seem that we're doing so much inner work that it's selfish. And a lot of volunteers, as somebody who's worked with volunteers for the majority of my career, it may seem like this kind of like selfish point of view or the like, but it really does take that inner work, especially when we're talking about people who might be talking about racism for the first time and etc., that we have to deal with our own identities and the like first, so we can see what our lens is when we're looking out, so we don't accidentally, or not even accidentally, but that we don't, use a lens that might be projecting something we don't intentionally mean to onto someone else. And doing that inner work first, that self-reflection, is really important to doing that. So mentors on the call know that this inner work is really important, so you can do that outer work with your mentee and the like. So we want to make that commitment to actively engage in the ongoing self-reflection and learning about your social identity and experiences. So asking questions about and exploring the many ways you define yourself, the many ideas in the circle, and what those identities mean in the context of the power structures, here in the United States. So, and you might find, another part of reflecting on your identity is that you may feel pride about parts of your identity, which is great. And that can be very positive. But cultural humility means acknowledging that you may believe some parts of your identity are superior to other groups. So when I was reading that, I was like, I find myself all the time telling my husband that women are better than men. I should probably reevaluate that, think about that a little bit deeper. And things like that. So we want to, again, I need to do some self-reflecting about that. and how we build that positivity and how I can feel positive about the the aspects of my social identity without tearing down another group, right? And that takes some self-reflection that I need to go do on my own. But again, having that space to do that self-reflection, took me to that place to be able to do that. Consider how your social identities affect your interactions with your mentee. What social identities will be most meaningful and salient to your mentee? So salient meaning like what social identities could your mentee see excuse me, to be meaningful for your mentee. So you and your mentee might be similar in race, but different economic background or in your sexual identity. So perhaps your racial and gender identities are the most meaningful parts of how you perceive yourself in your own experiences, excuse me, but for your mentee, perhaps their sexual identity is the most meaningful part, but how you influence how your mentee and you, pardon me, let me say that again. So for you, maybe your racial and gender identities are the most meaningful parts of how you perceive yourself in your own experiences. But for your mentee, perhaps their sexual identity is the most meaningful part, which may influence how your mentee perceives you and themselves and understand their own experience. So you may value different parts of your identity and they may value different parts of their identity. And therefore, when you meet and you have, again, you share certain parts of your social identity, you differ in certain parts, you need to consider where that overlap is, where it's not. And again, once you get to know yourself, get to know them, which we'll talk about in a little bit in the next slide, then you can kind of see how this will be affecting your interactions. And again, if you don't do that self-reflection, and we'll talk about learning in the next slide, then you kind of see how that will affect your interactions. Again, engaging in this critical self-reflection, you'll be ready and more open to learning about your mentee's experiences. And while you're doing this self-reflection, of course, may bring up, feelings of anger, shame, guilt, sadness, and this is normal and part of the process around social identity and oppression and privilege. And it's important that you explore these feelings further and sit with them. And again, that's why we are encouraging you to do it, and why as I mentioned earlier, it's not selfish to do it, because we want you. It's important to sit with those feelings, especially alone, so we're not burdening our mentees when we're having these potentially negative feelings. So take the time, spend some time with these feelings so we can sort through them, and again, not potentially project them onto our mentee, because these feelings are for us to sort through, and then so then we can learn about our mentee and their experiences, which is what we're going to get into next. Okay. So yay, our mentee. So this learning part. So I've done our self-reflection. We've figured out our own social identities and kind of the power structure to be and how we relate to the world around us. We want to actively seek opportunities to learn about our mentees' culture. So how can we do that? Reading, movies, podcasts, media. I mean, there's so many different opportunities to potentially do that, right? And when warranted and invited, this is of particular importance to participate in that culture. So when warranted and invited, going to repeat that again, to participate in that culture. So your mentee ideally should be the person that is inviting you to participate in that culture. There should be no self-invitation whatsoever. And your mentee presumably is the person closest to you in that culture to be giving you that invitation. Those learning opportunities, again, you can do all of those on your own and you can go as deep as you want. And even the invitation to conversation, you can let your mentee know that, no, I was reading this. Can you tell me more about it? You can do the invitation to conversation and they could say yes or no about whether they want to talk about it or not. That's up to them. But again, those invitations to truly participate in the culture, to go to do some of that kind of in-person deeper learning should be up to them. And we want to honor that space too, because especially for a younger person or if they're an immigrant or whatever their experience might be, again, let them tell you what their experience is. It may or might not be more meaningful to them. So again, we want to give them that space to tell you what their experience is, no matter what you may be learning about it in these other spaces, and let them invite you to participate. Their invitation is very important. So engaging in a process of asking questions, like I said, and learning about your mentee's social identities. And we do want to refrain from making assumptions about social identities. And again, giving space for your mentee to tell you exactly who you are. And then once we get to learn about social identities, considering about how systems of oppression and privilege shape your mentee's experiences. As we likely will have potentially a greater understanding about systems of oppression and privilege, your mentee may have those lived experiences and stories to share about interacting with those systems of oppression and of privilege or lack of privilege. So again, let them tell you about those lived experiences and do not make assumptions. Do the learning, but those lived experiences can look very different and may hit you in a different way. So we want to balance the learning with what our mentee tells us about or invites us to know about their lived experiences. We want there to be a balance there about what we can learn on our own about our mentees' culture once we know what their social identities are and what our mentee can tell us about who they are. Because with all people are the experts of their own lives and of who they are and what their identities are. So again, we want to find that balance there. And again, remain open to the idea that our mentees' lives are different than ours, even if we share certain social identities, because, well, one, they're younger than us. So there's always that difference there, even if we have overlapping social identities. But two, they're not us. They're just different. So even if we have shared social identities, we want to remain open to the idea that they're different than us and that let them tell us who they are. And then learn about our mentee's family. Again, this is on that invitation side, but for that kind of age thing, that generational thing. So while, of course, our mentee and their own family likely share the same culture and more overlapping social identities, there's likely a difference of experience and the like. So with invitation, etc., get to learn your mentees' families and where they come from. Ideally, if you're a program, making space for that, for including family in relationship. There is a chapter in Becoming a Better Mentor about how to include more of the stakeholders in a young person's life in the mentoring relationship. There is tons of research and value to that. But for you, the mentor, if you are able to make this part of your practice for culture humility, it can be a real value add, because a family can tell you, of course, a lot about their child. Let a family tell you. Again, so much is about giving space for people to tell you who they are and what their experiences are. And so much is about listening and letting people do that. So this is so much is a practice, and again, stretching to give people a place to tell you who they are and to be open for what people tell you to change and to adapt and grow. Awesome. And then kind of some last considerations before we get into some more practical stuff and we break out again. So something to always consider is that there will always be an age-based power differential between you and your mentee, always. If you've not heard of the concept of adultism, it's always something to consider, but there's always at minimum that age-based power differential. Even if all your social identities are the same, the reality of mentoring is that there's typically always somebody who's an older person and a younger person. So we want to consider that there's always that age-based power differential, but there's likely to also be a power differential based on one of your social identities. So I'll leave this next question for our next breakout, but we want to consider, how might these impact your mentoring relationship, the age-based power differential, but also the power differentials within your other social identities. And then a contextual situation is that what am I trying to say? A positive byproduct of practicing culture humility is that it can disrupt saviorism. So some of you may have been to our Combating White Saviorism training. It is a training we try to do twice a year. And white saviorism is its own thing, but saviorism in general, the idea that's been propagated by it's kind of is like the foundation of the history of mentoring, but the idea that an adult person swoops in to save a young person that needs saving, etc. Culture humility, because it gives space for the young person to have a voice, to again, tell you who they are, to grow, etc. Culture humility can really disrupt that, which is wonderful. So if you are affiliated with a program, or if you are a program, does your program give you space, or does your program encourage you to practice cultural humility? So I posed that question for my mentors on the call to question your program or to ask yourself that to do that. And for programs, is this something that's built into your, your mentor life cycle? Space to do it, encouragement to do it, tools to do it. This chapter being one of them, and something to consider. So I want to, pose that to you all, because this is again a wonderful byproduct of this engaged practice of culture humility, which again is ongoing. So is there the ongoing space and encouragement to practice culture humility? All right, I'm going to share, and this is cut straight from the chapter of culture humility in the resource. So I'm going to break us out again. It's 12:36, so we can do a good 10 minutes. So I'm going to break us out, and I'm not going to force you to answer any specific questions. Obviously, there's a few here. And again, these are those self-reflection questions. I'm going to we'll break out into the same groups that you were in, so you can continue to build on the relationships that you made in your first breakout. But, visit the questions that you'd like. I'd like everyone to, should have 2 minutes or so, 10 minutes, 2 minutes or so to answer the question that, it hits them specifically. But these questions are in the resource, and again, are questions that can continually to be revisited about to again do that ongoing self-reflection and to specifically think about a young person that either is your mentee or a young person that's coming to mind as we've gone through this training. So I'm gonna again share this in the breakout. I'm gonna open the breakout rooms now and give you another 10 minutes to get into conversation with each other. So I'm gonna pause our recording and open those now. Welcome back. If anyone wants to share anything interesting that came up in that, again, some of that self-reflection as it came up in your group, please feel free to drop in the chat, come off mute. And again, I also don't want to press, because a lot of this work is actually done alone. But when we have the opportunity to share together, I want to give you guys the opportunity. So if you'd like to share, I'd love to hear it, but feel free to drop in the chat as well.
I can share. One thing in my development that I'm trying to be intentional about is reflecting on, what I'm learning from young people. It's especially coming from being a teacher. It's easy to think about, like what we can teach or what I can teach a young person or young people, but keeping in mind the things that they taught me, and not in some type of like symbolic way, but literally like things that language maybe I've learned, or tools, especially when it comes to like technology I've learned because a young person showed me. So like in a lot of ways, they aid in my development, and their, lived experiences are valid. Their opinions, definitely affect how I view things, and being open to that really just make me a better overall communicator with them, whether I'm teaching something or, partaking in some type of activity. Observing them, even some of our youth trainers in our summer camp program, like how they talk to the younger campers, like everything, like I can learn a lot definitely from them. So I've been thinking a lot and reflecting a lot on that lately.
Awesome. I love that. Yeah, giving youth credit and that kind of assigning a greater value to the things that they say and do and teach us, because so much of the time, and I know for us on this call, we're the ones who do hear, we're doing the hearing and the listening. And if we do that deeper hearing and listening, there's so much value to things that they say. And that's to call all the way back to that beginning when we're doing that shift to that narrative and we're uplifting youth voice. There's so many wonderful things when they have that platform for what they have to give and to offer. So yeah, the actual and substantive way. Thank you for that in the chat. I love that. Great reflection. Keep doing it. Again, for that ongoing self-reflection. Love that. Thank you so much for sharing. Thanks, y'all. So for the sake of time, I do have one more short little activity. So at the end of the chapter, there's so kind of in that next bit for the questions for the ongoing learning, you'll see again, just sort of like that less questions, because again, so much is determined about what your mentee shares with you, right? And a lot of this is too about that kind of power differential and that dynamic, which is extremely important for you to do that learning about. But again, it starts with you, and then it starts with you learning about your mentees. So this is all in that resource, which is at that Better Mentor link. But again, I'll get all that emailed out to you. So lastly, now, all right, hold on. I'm going to pause my share because this doesn't want to do what I want it to do. Okay. I'm not giving up. I'm maybe giving up. Oh my God. My tab got lost between my screens. Okay. Lastly, I want to ask the question, what happens, especially in a situation, we talked about why these things are hard, right? Like these things are hard to talk about, awkward to talk about. What happens if you make a mistake? And I don't want to be the only person answering this question, because we've all made mistakes. And one thing I like to tell mentors is that we don't want to seem, youth don't typically appreciate no, what do I want to say? Actually, no, I'm not going to say it. Y'all, this is the question. What happens if you make a mistake? Give in this situation, as we're doing this self-learning, as we're doing this, learning about our mentee, as we're practicing culture humility, what happens if we make a mistake in this process? If you go to this link, if you text mentor MDDC 946 to 2233, you can answer this question and your questions will, or your answers will pop up. How can we assist someone if they make a mistake in this process? Also, are you all seeing my screen? Now that I'm seeing that, now I'm getting self-conscious because I ruined it. Okay. So we're trying to learn about your mentee, trying to learn about ourselves, trying to do shared cultural identity learning. What happens if you make a mistake? You're a mentor supervisor, someone's made a mistake. How are you going to help them? Acknowledge it, apologize, talk through it, learn from it. Yes. Keep going and do differently the next time. Yeah, definitely do something different. Yeah. Mentees will understand. Be honest about your mistake, apologize if necessary, and figure out how to learn from it. Ask more questions. Yes, and now I was going to say, be honest about your mistake. If your mentee thinks that you never make mistakes, then you are modeling that people never make mistakes, and your mentee will think that they can never make mistakes. So when we're honest about making mistakes, and then we do it differently next time, then your mentee knows that they can make mistakes, that they should apologize if necessary, and then that they can change and do it next time. Second, talk to each other or as a group with other mentees. Yeah, talk through it. Perfect. Wonderful. Anything else? One more gem. Do we have one more gem here? Ask for help. Yes, another great thing to model for our young people, right? Ask for help. No one is to suffer alone. And y'all better not, because also that's why we're here. We want to help you. And also don't be so hard on yourself. Yes, that's also why I said earlier that this is not an easy process and it will be uncomfortable and hard. And don't be so hard on yourself. Yes, Something I'm constantly reminding my husband. Don't be so hard on yourself and ask for help, please. And remind young people of all this as well, constantly. Yes, yes. Yes, thank you all so much. I didn't want to make a slide about that because I knew you guys knew the answer. So I saved myself time there. Wonderful. All right. Let me get to my wrapping up if I didn't lose my slideshow. Maybe I did. Okay. We're in our last few minutes. We made it. Thank you. We made it. Thank you guys so much for coming. To wrap up, when we close the meeting today, a survey will come up about what you got at this training, about trainings or workshops or any kind of event you'd like to come to. So please let us know. We do review that information when we're building our calendar. So please fill it out because we really do look at it. So please fill it out, please, please, please. Things that are coming up, you can access the links to register for these on our website. But later in July, we have our trauma-informed and healing-centered mentoring. We did this last week with Baltimore's Promise, and we are doing it again. It's great, and I enjoy doing it, and I hope you will come. And then our Maryland for Youth Conference is coming up in November. Early bird registration is now, so get those early bird prices. This is our first time we're doing it in person in 2 or 3 years. It's going to be awesome. It's going to be in Annapolis. Yes. So please join us. Looking forward to it. And then if you are interested, this is also time sensitive. So I'm dropping this link here. The link looks very long. Sorry about that. So Mentor Maryland DC has been selected by Mentor National to host the LGBTQ Ally Sites training cohort. So this is a 3-session cohort that goes on to have quarterly check-ins and coaching to get our programs aligned with the LGBTQ kind of supplement for best practices in ensuring that our programs are safe and affirming places for LGBTQ young people. Not that our programs, that your program has to specifically cater only to these youth, but that your program is a safer and affirming place for these youth for whatever your general goals for your program. So if you're interested in joining, this is an application process. So I dropped the link to the application there. You can also scan the QR code if you're interested in applying. It is a commitment type process. So if you're interested in joining, I am the representative from Mentor Maryland DC who will be going through that. It starts soon. We're going to start reviewing applications as soon as, towards the end of next week. So if you're interested, please join us on this deep, deep work. Michael, the link will pop up as soon as we exit out. So it's exactly 1 o'clock. Our meeting is now over. Thank you so much for coming, y'all. I will see you next time. Thank you for your participation. I will see you then. Have a good rest of your week. See y'all.